Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a very accomplished professional and academician from Bangalore, India, Dr. Smitha Ranganathan. Smitha, welcome to the show.
Hi, Ashutosh. Thank you for being so generous. It's wonderful to chat up with you. I've been looking forward to it.
Thank you. Dr. Ranganathan is an Unprofessor, an independent board member, a healthcare brand leader. She teaches digital strategy, brand communication, and contemporary marketing at SP Jain School of Global Management, and she's a recipient of several awards. With such an amazing background, Smitha, let me start by asking you about your own journey and the meaning of Unprofessor.
Thank you, Ashutosh. I think I am deeply grateful to be at the right places at the right time to learn and make a difference. I chose to call myself an Unprofessor for two reasons. One is I don't want to be professorial and settle down in what I'm doing.
Correct.
Secondly, through my learning years at college and school, always looked at ways to undo the known pedagogy of learning and teaching and reinventing. So I consciously keep a sense of flux in the title. And in fact, I don't believe in titles, which will keep me motivated to invent and reinvent myself and my classrooms. That's the context of the Unprofessor.
Fascinating. So let's now move to branding. Let me start by asking you a very basic question. What goes into building a successful brand?
Right. So I think branding to me has been one of the most misused terminologies to depict market offerings, right? If you ask me, my experience in trying to help manage some of these brands is that there are three critical V's that goes into crafting a brand. One is vision. I think we start with vision, and brands cannot be afterthoughts. Second is volition. And the reason I call volition is not every organization out there has the drive to make that delta X difference to what it takes to create those brands. Last but not the least, and I think this is a slightly unconventional take, is vulnerability. We've got to understand that just like human beings, organizations and brands need to embrace vulnerability. So these would be my three V's: the vision, volition, and vulnerability at different stages in the life cycle is what goes into crafting a brand strategy.
Very interesting. And yet, I'm from a very different generation, the boomers generation. But, when you talk brands are living beings. I often said they're like children. They need to be nurtured all the time. My question to you is, how can brands stay relevant for a long period of time?
I can't agree more with you. And in fact, one of the most humbling learning moments for me about what is a brand happened in one of the classroom at, I think, one of the IITs, where I was giving out a talk, and there's this engineer who told me, according to me, a product is made out of atoms and a brand is made out of neurons. I think that was the wow moment for me. So absolutely right. It's a living being, right? It's a set of experiences, and an experience is as good as the previous one. So the only way to continue, keeping them really relevant is to stay very humble, so that you can continue to create a very authentic and vibrant experience for your stakeholders.
But there are some brands. When you look at some of these established companies like a Unilever or a Procter and Gamble and so many others, but there are brands that have survived 100 years, and there are some companies which launch brands and they disappear from the market in 2 or 3 years. What is the reason, in your opinion, that brands survive 100 years?
I think the utility and value of a brand is about what you're building for tomorrow. If you end up creating your brand goals, which is tied to your quarter-to-quarter results, which is actually a big challenge that a lot of organizations do encounter, right? One is you end up taking very myopic steps that get into it, number one. Second, some of these brands, like for instance, Lifebuoy is a brand that I'm extremely fascinated with, and the way it's reinvented its avatar over and over again. These are brands which have continuously reinvented not just their brand communication strategy, but the sense of purpose, why they need to exist in the lives of the customer. You know, one of the most fundamental lessons that we taught in marketing and branding is ask yourself, what's that job in the life of the customer that the customer chooses to hire you, and how can you keep that, you know, path relevant? So I think these are brands which have continuously had the courage to ask themselves this question, even if that means shedding old school legacy and being relevant.
Well said. Great response. And, you know, it's amazing you spoke of Lifebuoy, because that was at the top of my mind as well. So it's amazing what a brand can do. My next question to you, Smitha, is that, you know, you have spent a lot of time in the digital world, and you teach digital strategy as well. How do brands and brand managers adapt to this new environment of the digital world that we are all living in?
Okay, I think I'll slightly rephrase that, Ashutosh, with your permission. I tried to teach digital strategy. I think digital is still this animal which everybody's trying to tame, right? And I say this in my classes that digital strategy must be like a protozoa called amoeba, which changes its form, shape, and function every single second, right? I think the fundamentals of branding and being relevant to market audiences never goes out of context. But what digital allows us is gives you some very interesting democratic channels to access your stakeholders and have a sense of voice on an ongoing basis. So that is one. But having said that, as democratic as digital can be, digital could also end up being very noisy and nosy.
Correct.
So my recommendation to people dabbling with digital is continue staying very committed to your sense of purpose or your sense of why and what is it that you want to achieve with your stakeholders. Second, I think there is this whole craze about moment marketing, because digital allows that seamless transmission of ideas and information. You don't necessarily need to jump into every single bandwagon and have your sense of say in it. Be very measured in the stance that you're taking, and how authentically does it reflect what you believe in. So I think it's about filtering out the noise and taking a very conscious stand of not want to be nosy in the lives of your customers.
And moving further, you know, when you talk about the digital world, you talk of Web 1, Web 2, Web 3.0 now, brands have suddenly discovered the metaverse. And, you know, I've been reading, there are these big, large brands who are acquiring real estate in the metaverse. I'd love to get your perspective on how do brands and brand managers adapt to this incredibly fast changing environment that they have to work in.
I could be slightly biased about my opinion about metaverse, okay, and I would be very measured in being very prescriptive about the way forward on it. But I think it's an Alice in Wonderland moment for everybody.
Okay.
Right? The brand managers, customers, and in fact, brands, there have been brands which have done really well on it, and there are lots of brands who are quite lonely out there trying to connect with their audiences.
Correct.
So I think just because there's that piece of real estate available, you got to ask yourself to what extent are your customer personas really finding a way to engage with you there, and then take that path.
Okay. Now, you know, let's talk a little bit now about the communication aspect of branding, and you know, you also work in the area of brand communications. You know, 40 years ago, when I was young guy, looking at marketing branding, there were these big billboards, the full page newspaper ads. Today, everything has shrunk to the little phone that we all carry. How is messaging and communication changing?
That's a great question, Ashutosh. I deal with this every day in my classrooms as well, because I'm dealing with people with the attention of a goldfish, and I'm sure you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
So while the poetry around long form content still exists, right? And you will find some of the best brand communication stories, what we call them as brand stories on YouTube, still have audiences at 3+ minutes. The trigger points for me to keep people interested in lean forward communication and messaging will be shrinking. So from that perspective, brevity continues to be wit. So I try to look at communication messaging as lean forward and lean back messaging context. Lean back contexts are when brands can challenge Netflix content and create wow content, which they don't care about what's the runtime, right? Because we can also use owned media to broadcast this. Correct. On the other hand, lean forward content, there is a way for me to be very, very frugal in earning the attention of customers and trying to be relevant to them within 10 to 12 seconds.
And if you go one step further, from the cinema ads, which were maybe 1 minute, to the so-called elevator pitch, which may have been 30 to 45 seconds, to TikTok, which is now even shorter. Now I'm seeing communication happening in 7 to 10 seconds. How does communication change to be able to convey the message in such a short span of time, and how does it stick? Right.
So I think for communication to stick, it's no longer about the runtime of the ad or the communication, but a 360-degree immersion that you're able to achieve within those 6 seconds. Recently I had the opportunity to learn from one of my students in class of a fantastic campaign that was run on a social messaging context, which is do not use your mobile phones while you drive.
Correct.
Now, this is a very preachy communication that millennials don't care about. But what actually happened was this was run as a 6-second commercial in a cinema theater. And exactly at the 4th second, while they show a car on the street, using geofencing technology, all people in the theater received an SMS alert.
Wow.
And while everybody picked up the phone, the screen moves to show you a crash. So the runtime of this ad is lesser than that of a YouTube's TrueView ad of 7 seconds.
Wow.
But the impact is so immersive. So I don't think we should look at the metric of runtime anymore, but the immersiveness of the experience, which is going to determine to what extent can that message be sticky.
Fascinating. And it's always been said that anecdotes and examples are very powerful communicators. So the example you've given me of a message on, an SMS on everyone's phone is quite amazing. The next question for you is on social media. Every brand is trying to be on every social media platform. Smart brand managers are beginning to pick different platforms. I'd love to get your perspective on how does a brand decide which platform is the most appropriate one for it?
I think this is one of the most difficult puzzle to crack for brand custodians and for advisors like you and me, because I think there is this innate FOMO to be there on every platform, right? So I think I go back to the good old marketing strategy, thought process. Understand who are these set of customers that you want to target. What is the digital platform habits of these customers? And how do you use that as a key context to speak to them or to listen to them? So I think social media, when used well, can be an extremely powerful channel to both listen and to communicate. The second aspect is the flip side of social media is it can also be like a big inauthentic beach party. And the reason I say this is everybody likes to say the right or the nicest things to each other on social media, whether they mean it or not, and not to take away the challenges around trolls, right? So I think it's important for you to establish yourself as a brand which is authentic. You got something relevant to say, and you're there to mean business, which is going to make a difference to the lives of customers. So, for instance, business to business brands, I think there's huge opportunity for them to reimagine themselves on a platform like LinkedIn, for instance. Now, I think LinkedIn, for once, I'm glad that in the context of the pandemic, saw some vibrancy in content. Otherwise, it just ended up being a networking platform which lacked a soul, right? So it's important for us to understand platform habits of our customers and have something relevant to speak to them there.
Very interesting. I'd like to now move to talking about this whole new breed of influencers. I remember, and even now, but in my time, it was more film stars, sports stars who were always attached or attracted, who were attached to brands or use them for promoting their brand. But there's this whole new breed of influencers and micro influencers. I'd love to get your perspective on how are my influencers supporting or maybe harming brands.
Okay, I think I'm glad you brought in both the pros and cons of working with influencers. Yeah. I think it's a huge opportunity when done well. I think we are gone are those days when I'm willing to believe that there is this six-pack chiseled celebrity standing close to an air fryer brand, and I think he has a samosa and yet manages his six-pack, right? Gone are those days.
Absolutely.
So today, when I'm going to be buying myself a Philips air fryer, I'd rather listen into an expert who is a quasi-mother figure who's going to be hand-holding me to figure out how am I going to be cooking using this new approach for my family, right? So I think micro-influencers, when chosen well, come with tremendous amount of credibility to truly make a difference to your decisions. But I think brands also should change the metrics around their choice of influencers. I think it's not about the number of followers, and you know what that amounts to.
Correct.
It's about the quality of the engagement that an influencer manages to garner and the kind of standing that the influencer has with his or her community and the authenticity she represents, which should stand to be the key reason why they pick up. So I think when influencer marketing done well can be extremely powerful.
Very interesting. And I was speaking to someone in the US a few weeks ago, and when I asked them a similar question, they said they're very cautious of using influencers because they said influencers use all the budgets to promote themselves and not the brand. So that was a very interesting perspective I got. But now moving on, I have time for two more questions. I wanted to talk to you about the younger leaders who are coming in, the millennials and the Gen Zs who are now coming into leadership roles in the companies, getting into branding. One of the things I have seen, and both my sons are millennials, everything they decide to decide on which brand is based on reviews. How important is this change that's happening? They won't go to a restaurant without looking at reviews. They won't buy a product without looking at a review. Is this changing the way brands have to think of themselves?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Can't agree more. So this actually happened, I think, somewhere maybe the amount of time I spend with millennials, and my children are millennials themselves, is I've also started tinkering my decision process around it. So the other day I was at a place where I was Googling out restaurants near me, and I found a new Pani Puri store right opposite. But the first decision there was, what was the rating? Unless it is a 4+ rating, you do not want to order on Zomato, right? So I think this is as real as it gets, right? It's definitely from millennials. I think many of us are also adapting to this approach of decision making. Now, this brings in two very interesting, and pardon me to bring in a sense of academic edge.
Please do.
I speak about a concept that was, for the very first time, suggested by Google in the year 2011, and we call it the 0th moment of truth. The amount of research that a customer actually carries out before he gets into the funnel of decision making. So the 0th moment of truth is all the ratings and reviews that he manages to get in response to his search query. The interesting part is, for brands to win in the path to purchase, for them to win on the 0th moment of truth becomes extremely critical. And for them to win on the 0th moment of truth, they need to remain relevant to customers even post-purchase. What do I mean by that? The customer, the last customer who ended up buying your product must end up being an advocate for your brand and go out there in the social media universe and rate and review the product, which becomes perhaps the second moment of truth for the previous customer, but helps garner or generate organically the 0th moment of truth for the next customer. So I think brands can no longer look at customers merely as a transaction ID. I need to find a way to convert a stranger to a customer, to a loyalist, to an advocate. And unless I have this path edged, I think very few brands will win in the noisy 0th moment of truth.
What a great response. Thank you. And my last question to you, and this is for the many, many people who will listen to our conversation. Based on your amazing experience, of teaching branding, communications, what would you say are 3 lessons? And I'm now appealing to the Unprofessor in Dr. Ranganathan. What would be 3 lessons you would want our viewers and listeners to take away?
I think stay humble.
Yeah.
Okay. Invest in people. And have the courage to ask why not.
Wonderful. Wonderful. And on that note, and your 3 amazing lessons, stay humble, invest in people, and have the courage to ask why not. Thank you, Dr. Ranganathan, for speaking to me. Thank you for talking to me about branding, about communication, about the digital community, about the metaverse, and about all the amazing examples that you have given me from Lifebuoy to Google about branding and the different aspects of branding, which I'm sure all of our viewers and listeners will enjoy listening to. Thank you again for speaking to me, and good luck to you.
Deeply grateful, Ashutosh. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.